Well, it's an honor to be with you, and you heard a little bit about who I am, but you're probably wondering, how did I end up here? The ministry that I work for, Galcom, we've been partnering with Shane Presbyterian Church in Stony Creek for years. They've supported our missionaries. They come to our office and help us build our little solar radios. We've had staff members and board members from their church. They've gone on mission trips around the world. And so they've been partnering so long. Actually, the first time I spoke at their church, I saw my old elementary school principal there. And they still continue to partner with us, which was good. So actually a few months ago, I was there speaking to their seniors group, sharing what God had been doing through our ministry. And their interim moderator, Sandra Copeland, asked if I would fill in down at St. Paul's Presbyterian in Burlington, because they're searching for a new moderator. And then I guess she was talking to Matt Vizeri, who I guess is the interim moderator here. And so they said, hey, we need someone to fill in. So Lord willing, I'll be joining you every month or so and sharing from God's word. So that's you found out who I am and why I'm here. In my travels, I mentioned I've been at Shane, I've been at St. Paul's, and now here at Knox. In my work with Galcom, I've also visited a lot of other kinds of churches, Baptist churches. I was just actually at a Baptist church out in Calgary last week. I was in Montreal a month ago, and community churches, missionary churches. And I find that churches are different. You know, this church has pews, others have couches. We were at a church that it was all couches. Tobias liked that one the best. This is the first church I've ever been to with a flugelhorn. That is a flugelhorn, right? Where did you? Yeah. We've been more churches with flugelhorns. Thank you. I've been at the rock and roll churches with the smoke and the lights. I've been at the churches with just the organ. So it makes me think, what makes a church a church? What makes a group of us believers? What should be the defining characteristic of what happens when we get together? Is it the music? Is it the stained glass? What is it? And that's why we read John 13. Jesus said, by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. The mark of any church that follows Jesus Christ should be our love for one another. If you mentioned there's some guests here that you don't know, it shouldn't be like, I've been in churches, they sing the songs, I'm like, I don't know any of the songs. I've been in Anglican churches where I don't know when to stand up or sit down. And I watch somebody, and I just, okay, that's time to stand up. It shouldn't be those things. So if you're new and you don't know what's going on, that's okay. You'll get used to the way churches' rhythms go. But what should attract you to a church is, do they love one another? And you find that out over time. Actually, one way to find out about a church, if they love one another, is actually during the announcements. What programs are they doing? Are they giving bursaries to students? God bless you. What a wonderful way to show love for the young people in your church. Yeah, give yourselves a hand. I'm good. It's these things that demonstrate, do we love one another? Is there some, thanking God that a couple got married? Like these things that show, do we care? Do we love? But then it got me thinking, just what is Jesus talking about when he says, by this all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another? And I bet actually you're probably thinking of something that I'm not talking about. You're probably thinking about affection. You love your kids, you love your grandkids. There's a warm feeling there. Not what Jesus is talking about. How do I know? Because in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, love your enemies. Okay, so not a warm feeling for our enemies. Maybe you're thinking, if you're the young people here, you're probably thinking maybe attraction. There's somebody that you love. You're attracted to them. There's a little bit of romance maybe, I don't know. No one's making eye contact with me now, the younger people. So that's not what Jesus is talking about again. Not to get into Greek and so on, I'm not a Greek scholar, but he uses a word here called agape, and you've probably heard that word in church before. And agape love is different than affection. It's different than attraction. It's a purposeful, active choice to do something for others. And I'm getting some quizzical looks. So what we're going to do, since I'm going to be joining you over a couple of Sundays, is we're actually going to unpack this word the same way that Paul did in 1 Corinthians 13. If you've been to a wedding recently, you've probably heard this passage. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, love does not boast, it's not puffed up, keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. So over the next 4 hours, we're going to go through that list. No. because I'm going to be here over a couple of months, Lord willing again, we're going to look at a couple of these characteristics to help us understand what Jesus meant when he said, love your neighbor, love each other, love your enemy. That list in 1 Corinthians is no emotion there, right? There's no emotions there. Love is not an emotion. Love is kind, not an emotion. Enduring, bearing down. No, those are choices. Those are characteristics of how we should be treating each other. And what I want to do, instead of, like I said, I'm not a Greek scholar. We're not going to go there and look at the words and try to get all the fancy definitions. I want to tell a story. I want to tell a story of someone who actually personifies the characteristic that will help us become better disciples of Jesus, to help us love each other better. And so the first one on the list, if you have a Bible, 1 Corinthians 13 says, love is patient. Love is patient. What does that mean? Well, if you've got a Bible, turn to Genesis 37. We're going to look at somebody's life who personifies this idea of being patient, loving others so much. And in fact, if you have an old version of the Bible, a King James version or something like that, it will say love suffers long, or love is long suffering. Kind of adds a little more weight to that than just patience. Patience for my son Tobias is just waiting at the microwave for last night's pizza to warm up. Oh, 30 seconds, I gotta wait. No, that's not what we're talking about here. This is long suffering, over years, maybe decades, having to endure. Well, let's not give away the story. So Genesis 37, we're going to go through it fairly quickly. I'm going to read some verses, and you probably, if you've been around in Sunday school, you'll know this story. So let's just read some verses, and then I'll kind of fill in some of the gaps. Genesis 37. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, another name for Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. A little bit of background if you don't know the story. Jacob wanted to marry someone by the name of Rachel. Make sure Rebecca. Rachel. Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob, Rachel, Leah. Yes, Rachel. But instead, his father-in-law tricked him, and he ended up marrying Leah. And then Leah had some of children, and Rachel felt bad, so she said, well, take my maidservant, Bilhah. He had some more children, Zilpah. And so you have 10 brothers, all born to people that Jacob didn't want to marry. Finally, Rachel has a son, Joseph. And I'm not a psychologist, but there's some real weird stuff going on here about. And then Rachel has another son and dies in childbirth. So Jacob, the one wife he wanted, she dies. All he's got in memory of her are these two youngest sons. He loves Joseph more than the other brothers. They resent it, they hate him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. They're abusive. Again, I'm not a psychologist, but you probably heard the saying, hurt people, hurt people. These guys are hurt. And they're taking it out on Joseph. And so he's getting all of the abuse. Now, as I mentioned, I have 5 children. And nothing hurts me more than when they start picking at each other. One of the older ones will criticize one of the younger ones because, hey, you're stupid, or you don't do this, or you're smelly, or whatever. And this happens, and if you have children or siblings, you've seen this dynamic. But it says here pretty clearly, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Now imagine if this was happening all the time. If every time that you walked in the room, it was, hey, idiot. Every time you're at the table, instead of, pass the peas, it's, hey, and just constant beat down on Joseph. Well, just to make matters worse, God gives Joseph some dreams. Dreams where his brothers and his parents bow down to him in the dreams. You're familiar again if you've ever watched Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat or if you've been to Sunday school. And so skipping ahead down to verse 12, Joseph's brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, hey, your brothers are grazing their flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks and bring word back to me. And he sent him off to the valley of Hebron. Joseph arrived at Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, what are you doing here? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They've moved on from here, the man answered, down to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers, found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come, let's kill him, throw him in one of the cisterns, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him, and then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Now again, I've heard my kids picking on each other, saying nasty things to another, but I have never caught two of them conspiring to murder any of the others. Like, this is now a level of abuse and hatred this is not normal. This level of hatred, this level of abuse, this level of animosity and anger. And if you think about it, remember, this is why I mentioned it, Rachel died in childbirth with Benjamin. There's a special bond here that Jacob has for Joseph. He's the son of his old age, the son of the wife that he wanted, Rachel. They don't even care about the father, what this will do to him. Or Benjamin, the younger brother. This is his one full brother. They have no regard for anybody else in this situation. They hate Joseph so much, they just want to kill him. Well, there's a discussion here about, hey, let's not kill him. And then some slave traders come by. Why don't we sell him into slavery? So little regard for his life that let's just make money off him and sell him as a slave. They do it. They dip the robe in some goat blood, take it back to dad and say, is this your son's coat? Oh, we found it in the wilderness. Oh no. And Jacob is crushed. The thought that Joseph has died in the wilderness, and no remorse. The father's weeping, and Jacob says in verse 34, Jacob tore his clothes, put in sackcloth, and mourned his son many days. His father wept for him. They come to comfort him, but they don't admit anything. They don't say anything. Oh, actually, Daddy's alive. Dad, don't take it so hard. They don't care. So the level of abuse, you can just see by their actions, the way they treat their father, the way they sell Joseph into slavery, they hate him. So when it says earlier that they could not speak a kind word to him, you're getting the idea of just how abusive they were. Have you ever been abused? Have you had someone say terrible things to you? Or worse? What's your reaction? How do you handle it? We're going to see how Joseph handles it. I got to tell you, I don't think I would have much love for these other brothers. Perhaps even at the beginning when my father said, hey, go check on them, see how everything's going. I probably said, Dad, I'm not going out there with those guys. I don't care if they're lost in the wilderness. I don't care if all the sheep are gone too. I don't want anything to do with them. Don't you see how the way they're treating me? It's probably the way I would have responded. Chapter 38, we're going to skip, because that's not Joseph's story. So we pick up his story in chapter 39. This kind of gives us an idea, though, that some time has passed. Chapter 39, verse 1, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Now, if you were sold into slavery, what would your reaction be? I'd probably try to escape, quite frankly. I'd probably sulk around. I'd probably sabotage my work. I probably would want nothing to do with them. I would just be miserable. I'd probably shake my fist at God and say, God, why are you letting this happen to me? I didn't do anything wrong. What is going on here? Verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Wow. What a response. Now talking about this love, I skipped over something I shouldn't have. Back to the story of Jesus. When Jesus was telling his disciples, the defining characteristic of you, my disciples, should be love for one another. At another time, a lawyer came up to him and tried to trick him and said, hey, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? Remember what Jesus responded? He didn't respond with, thou shalt have no idols or, take the Sabbath off. He responded, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second command is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I mention that here because, again, I put myself in this story, and hopefully you're all doing that. You're putting yourself in Joseph's shoes and saying, okay, how do I show love to others? How did Joseph do it? What would I do? How do I change? This is what we're here at church for, to transform our lives, to become more like Jesus. And I look at myself and I say, I would be so mad at God right now that he would allow this to happen to me. I'd be shaking my fist at him and saying, why? But I think part of Joseph's testimony to us is he loved God so much that he was going to behave in such a way that would bring God honor and glory. He wasn't going to sulk around. He wasn't going to steal stuff from his master. He wasn't going to try to escape. He was going to serve. He was going to be a man of integrity. He was going to do things right, and not just right, but do them with excellence. And to the point where suddenly he's promoted to the head of the household. This Hebrew slave over in Egypt has conducted himself with such integrity and honor. God blesses him. Well, you know the rest of the story. What's Joseph rewarded with for all of his good behavior? Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him of assault, and he's thrown in jail. Really? God, really? I was doing everything that I should, and I end up in jail? Falsely accused? Have you ever been falsely accused? Maybe at work, something goes wrong, and everyone's like, it was his fault. And you get thrown under the bus. Maybe it's the kids. I know when something would go wrong at our house, something's broken. I didn't do it. It was so-and-so. I didn't do it. And they're like, okay, one of the 5 of you did it. You know, I'm not going to blame my wife. But that happens. People will lie, gossiping about you. Oh, so-and-so, they're an awful person, blah, 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 blah. And then you hear the people gossiping about you and accusing you of all sorts of terrible motives and activity and behavior. How do you respond? What do you do? Do you get them back? Oh, I'll get them back. I'll accuse them of something. I'll sabotage them. I'll do something wrong. Well, end of chapter 39. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. What? You're in jail. Now's the time to sit in the corner and sulk, isn't it? Now's the time. And, oh, hey, the warden's given him the keys. Time to use those keys and get out of here. No. This boggles my mind. And again, I think it's because Joseph loved God. He loved him so much that he was not going to do anything underhanded. He wasn't going to abuse the authority he had or the trust that was put in him. He was going to live a life of integrity and purpose. And so even though he's been abused and now falsely accused, Joseph continues to act in a way that would honor and glorify God. Chapter 40. You know, you don't have a clock at the back of your church, so I'm doing my best here, but you might want to install one. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. And after they had been in custody for some time, each of the 2 men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. And we know Joseph's a dreaming kind of guy, and God gives him revelation to what the dreams mean. And so Joseph says, hey, you guys look really worried this morning. What happened? I had this crazy dream last night that birds flew. I had 7 baskets on my head, and these birds stole the food away. Oh, I had a dream about 7 grapevines and so on. He interprets their dreams, says to the baker, I'm sorry to tell you this, but in 7 days, Pharaoh's going to chop off your head. Turns to the cupbearer, I'm pleased to tell you that in 7 days, you're going to be restored to your position. And he says to the cupbearer, hey, when you, I think it was actually 3 baskets, not 7. It was 7's coming up later in the next dream. He says, but when you get restored, remember me. Remember me here. You've seen my activity. I've been put here for no reason. I was falsely accused. I've been rotting in jail. When you get back before Pharaoh, tell him about me. Tell him about my cause. Well, chapter 40, verse 32. Actually, let's go back to 21. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in their interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Ever been neglected, passed over? Maybe you've been serving at work for 10, 15 years and a promotion comes up and you have been faithful, you've been there, you've been serving with excellence, and somebody else gets the raise. Someone else gets the promotion. In school, awards. Maybe somebody else got the award that you were sure you were going to get. I know my kids have sat there going, I deserve that. I worked so hard. I did everything, and then so-and-so got the award because their mom was the teacher or something like that. There's always an excuse, always a reason. But have you ever had that happen to you? And you're like, I have done my best. Why? Or there's a party, someone in the church's birthday, and all of a sudden Sunday morning you found out, hey, everybody, did you have a great time Friday night at the party? And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't get invited. What happened? How do you respond? What do you do? And the question again here in light of our conversation is we want to be able to love others, and we want to have a love that suffers long. Abuse, false accusations, neglect. This is all suffering that causes suffering. It hurts. I don't like it. People don't like me. And you start to, but how do you respond? The world would say, get your revenge. Stick it to them. Get them back. Have a party of your own and don't invite them. Sabotage the guy at work. God says, people will know that you're my disciple if you love one another. God says the most important commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. We're to be people of love. We're to conduct ourselves in such a way that shows love, not wanting revenge, not striving for ourselves. And Joseph is an incredible example to us, the amount of abuse he takes and the false accusations, and now rotting in jail for years. If you do the math, it's about 13 years from the time he walks to go look for his brothers till about the time in chapter 41 when 2 full years had passed in jail. Pharaoh had a dream standing by the Nile. And again, if you went to Sunday school, you know the dream of the 7 good stalks of grain and the 7 bad ones, the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows. The bad grain eats the good grain, the skinny cows eat the fat cows. And Pharaoh's having this panic, and he's like, someone's got to tell me what this means. And the cupbearer goes, I forgot about the guy in jail that knows the dreams. Pharaoh, excuse me, there's a guy in jail, and he interprets dreams. So they call for Joseph. He cleans himself up, interprets Pharaoh's dreams, becomes the governor of all Egypt, restored. Everything's great now. He's got servants and a palace and all the food he wants, and everything's great. And he's been justified in all of his faithfulness. God has given this incredible position, and he lives happily ever after. No. There's another part to our story that we need to address. Chapter 42, 7 years of plenty, Joseph stores up all the food, 7 years of famine start. And who shows up at his door begging for food? His brothers. His brothers who hated him and couldn't say a kind word to him. His brothers who plotted to kill him, but thought it better, let's make some money off of faking his death. His brothers, if this was me, if not revenge, at least justice. He's the governor of Egypt. He has the power to punish these guys, put them in jail, and to make them pay for their crime. But he doesn't. Now, I am not advocating staying in abusive relationships. I am not. But what I want to say is, as I said at the beginning, hurt people hurt people. This is what I was talking about, that whole family dynamic. These guys have been neglected by their father. They're not loved. They're second-class citizens, and they take it out on Joseph. Joseph knows this. He understands. And he looks at them and says, you guys are hurt and damaged. And I have the power now to do something. Most people that are victims of abuse never put in a position like Joseph. So I would say if you are a victim of abuse, you get out of the abuse and you say, how do I get that abuser the help that they need? How do I find them the counseling, or how do I point them in the right direction? I'm going to pray for that person's healing. There's a reason why they have this bad behavior. They act out in a certain way. I want them to get the help. I don't care about the punishment. They just need the help. Joseph is in a unique position where not only is he safe from his abusers now, but he can actually do something for them. And we have this wonderful set of tests, and I'm watching the clock here. So the first one is he accuses them all of being spies, and he gets them to tell their story. And they say, oh, there's 12 of us, but one of the brothers died. They're still hanging on to this lie. We got an aged father back home. He says, no, you're spies. The only way I'll believe you is if you bring the other brother, Benjamin, who's back home with dad, of course, because dad's hanging on to that last youngest son from his wife, Rachel. Doesn't want him to go and possibly get killed by a wild animal, like what he thought Joseph happened to Joseph. So the only way we'll believe you is if you bring Benjamin back. Threatens to put them all in jail. Back and forth, back and forth. Eventually, they agree that Simeon will stay in jail and the rest of them will go home. And you know what's interesting here? All the brothers are like, oh, maybe God's punishing us now for what we did. It even says that here. But they're quite happy to wave goodbye to Simeon and go home. Clearly, they haven't quite learned the lesson. Clearly, the group of them are all very selfish, self-absorbed, and not caring about anybody else. They don't love anybody. So Simeon, goodbye, we're going. Well, a year or so later, their food runs out. Famine's still going on. Jacob says, go back to Egypt to buy food. And they said, Dad, don't you remember what we told you when we came home? He won't give us food. We won't even be able to see his face unless we bring Benjamin. Do you want to bring my old gray head to the grave? If something happens to Benjamin, I will die of grief, he says to them. They're like, Dad, we got to bring Benjamin. We don't get food and we all die. Eventually they convince him. Benjamin goes. They go to Joseph. They have this dinner party. They suddenly think something's up because Joseph arranges them, oldest to youngest. He gives Benjamin a double portion of food. There's all this dynamic going on, and he sends them off restores Simeon to them and sends them off with their bags full of food, but puts his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Tells the servants to go get them and bring them back. And they open up the sacks and they find this cup is in Benjamin's sack. And Joseph, getting ahead of the story. Joseph says, whoever's sack I find the cup in, they'll be my slave and stay in Egypt. The rest of you can go. They start at the oldest and open up the sacks. The tension builds as they wonder who's going to have to stay in Egypt, who's going to be the lost brother. And it gets down to Benjamin and it's open and there's the silver cup. And the brothers tear their clothes and they start to weep. And Judah falls down in front of Joseph and begs and pleads and says, if Benjamin doesn't go home, my father will die of grief. Take me instead. The first test, Joseph kind of tore open the wound a bit, took off the bandage and exposed that wound, but they weren't willing to let it be cleaned when they left Simeon there. That's fine, let Simeon go. This time, they finally got to the heart of the matter. They have confessed their sin. They recognize they have done wrong. They did their father wrong by pretending that Joseph had died. They did Joseph wrong. And they see that they're being judged by God. And they don't want to be in this bad state again in their relationship with God, with each other, with their father, with their youngest brother. Take me, I will take the punishment for my wrongdoing, Judah says. I will take it. No more of this charade, no more of this hatred, no more of this self-absorbed, selfish behavior. I'll take it. And at that point, Joseph sees they get it. They've repented of their sin. They recognize how wrong they've been, and they're willing to change. They have changed. And he says, I'm Joseph. I'm the one you sold. And then fear, they think they're all going to be in jail. And Joseph says, don't worry. I forgive you. What you intended for harm, God intended for good, to save the nation of Egypt, to save you. He says the famine still has years to go. That's a whole other story. We're just talking about the love part. That's a whole other story about God's sovereignty and being able to trust in God, being able to love God. Actually, you know what? Joseph loved God so much that he trusted that all through this bad stuff, he could still trust God's plan for his life, that there was still a purpose. Even though his death was faked and he was thrown in jail, falsely accused, rotting in jail, 13 years all this happened, he still loved God enough to trust him that God had what was best for him in store. And then he loved his brothers enough to then want them to get the healing they needed, to repent of their sin, to be reconciled to God, to be reconciled to him, to be put right with their Father. This is a love that suffers long. This is the love that God is calling us, his disciples, to have. This is not Sunday school, Jesus loves me, this I know, or this is high level. I'm going to forgive you for your abuse. I'm still going to love you. You falsely accused me. I'm still going to love you. I've been neglected. You've forgotten about me. I'm still going to love you. Not once in the story does he shake his fist at God and say, why are you letting this happen? He loves God enough to trust him. Not once in the story do we hear him plotting any type of revenge against his brothers. No, he wants their healing. This is the call for us as disciples of Christ. And if you're going, Tim, this is crazy. Yes, it is. It is countercultural. It is not natural. We are by nature lazy, selfish, self-absorbed people. And it's hard for us to love others. But this is the call. This is the defining mark of us as disciples of Christ. Love is complicated. This is hard. This is why we're going to take that love poem, 1 Corinthians 13, in small bites. And we're going to look at somebody else's life. Now, you've probably heard a lot of the story, and like I said, we zoomed through it. Take time. Take this afternoon maybe, or sometime this week. Open your Bible to Genesis 37 and read through to chapter 42, 43. Read the whole story yourself. It'll be a lot slower. You'll be able to take it in. I know I talk pretty fast as it is. Never mind when I get excited. But this is something that we need to work on. Whether you've been a Christian for a week or for 40 years, we have to work. We have to be cognizant. We have to be allowing the Holy Spirit to work in us so that we can love others. I have homework for you. This week, someone's going to hurt you. They're going to say something nasty to you. Maybe it's careless. This week, you may get passed over and forgotten. Someone's going to get invited somewhere, you're going to get forgotten. And you're going to be sitting there going, what did I do wrong? Now, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? Are you going to allow the Holy Spirit to work in you to help you to show love? Or are you going to get your revenge? Love suffers long. All men will know you're my disciples if you love one another.